Welcome to 13 Cents More, the podcast. I am E. Probilski, an author, editor, and book publisher. I have done all these different things for many years, and I am here to share book publishing insights, personal anecdotes, information about my books, and so much more. Let's get into it. Alright, I hope your weather is nicer than mine is today, because mine is rainy and humid and horrible. If you hear my cat screaming in the background, I apologize. He is just in a mood this morning. This week we are talking about different kinds of author services. So these are the things that are available to authors out there. These are some terms you'll hear thrown around in writing groups. And a lot of people don't really understand what each of these terms covers. They'll say something like editing and not really know what kind of editing. Well, I'm not going to get too deep into the different kinds of editing today. I am going to mention a number of them, so keep an eye out for that. I'm also going to talk about things like beta readers and alpha readers and where all these people enter into the process. If you want a deeper breakdown of these various different kinds of editing and other services, they are available over on my website. That also covers services that I offer. And I don't offer every service on this list, but I do offer a large majority of them, in fact. So self-publishing comes with a whole lot of different hurdles that can be really stressful if you don't know what you're looking into. It can be very overwhelming, and it can be kind of terrifying if you don't know what's out there. Writers' groups can sometimes be helpful, sometimes not, because the advice in there is only as good as the group is. So you'll have people answering who may or may not have any idea what they're talking about, for better or for worse, usually for worse. I'm also going to break these down in order, so we're going to talk about things that you need at different phases of your book writing and publishing journey, so hopefully that will help. Finally, I do want to note that some coaches and editors define things differently than I do. I'm going to try and do this as generically as possible, so it will cover the maximum number of people I can. But every one of us does things a little bit differently, so make sure that you talk to the professional or the individual you're working with and let them know what you need and find out what they provide so that you have a clear view of what the options are out there. So let's get into the first segment about while you're drafting your book. So this is while you're writing your first draft, or maybe your second. It might be a little earlier than that if you don't know how to start, but let's get into what services are out there for people who are just starting their journey. The first one I'm going to mention is the book coach. While a book coach can be brought in during any stage of the process, we're most often brought in during the early stages of writing to talk about different problems you're facing, hang-ups you have, or other such things. It's different than developmental editing because usually this happens in sessions like maybe a Zoom call or a Google Meet call. And if you're local to your book coach, you might actually meet them in person if that is something that they and you are interested in doing. Coaching usually looks like a few emails to talk about what the author is fighting with. Then we sit down for a 30-minute or a 60-minute session where we talk about whatever it is the author's struggling with. I have worked on things from how do I fit my different kinds of writing together, to how do I write believable dialogue, to what is story structure and how do I use it. If I'm working on something that's more like a technical writing problem, there's a good chance we might do some exercises where I give the author something to work on and then we check in. I've also been an accountability partner for people who needed to check in with somebody to contact them and make sure they're writing their book and see where they're at to keep them on schedule. And I've helped people do consulting, so I do talk about things that I'm a subject matter expert on, like historical sword fighting, fantasy world building, story structure, those kinds of things. I put those under my coaching umbrella since I typically will use them in discussing elements of an author's book, like said world building. The next one we're going to talk about is alpha readers. Sometimes these are paid people, but sometimes not. You will hear this term tossed around a lot in writing spaces, and it is different than beta readers in the sense that alpha readers are seeing an earlier copy of the book. So for me, my alpha reader is my husband. He sees the outline, I talk over that with him, and he gets things sometimes chapter by chapter, but usually just occasionally a scene here and there. As a general rule, I don't normally share my writing process a lot, though I do post chapters behind the paywall here, so that is an exception if you want to get chapters early while I'm writing them and see just the raw, unedited things that I have written. Some people are more into that than others. My readers seem to really enjoy that, so that's what I share, in addition to the audiobook I'm currently recording. I also will contact subject matter experts in their field to ask them questions and maybe have them look at a scene. I have a friend of mine who is a critical care nurse and has been for a really long time. I've asked her to look at injury scenes or asked her questions about scenes with medical personnel more than once to verify that my data is correct while I'm writing. So I will sometimes pull in people like that to read a single scene, but as a general rule, I don't share early drafts. However, some people really need the feedback, so an alpha reader will take a look at a very early draft or read chapter by chapter as you write it. Typically, their quote-unquote job is to just encourage you or point out things that you might need to fix. It's not always deep feedback, but it's early feedback if you really need that. I kind of generally advise against using alpha readers too deeply because it can slow your pace down if you're trying to please a particular reader. So if you're going to use an alpha reader, I would suggest you do it more in the vein of the way I use them and have a friend or somebody you know check a scene if they're an expert on that thing and give feedback on whether or not the facts are correct. Beyond that, I wouldn't worry too much about that phase, simply because it can get overwhelming fast. So, caveat emptor. Next is the developmental editor. Now, these people are paid. A developmental editor will not work for free. Similar to a book coach, they often see the first draft of a story, or at least the outline, and they are looking for things like characterization, plot, pacing, world building, big picture elements. And with me, when I do a developmental edit, usually I'm looking at things like, are the chapters in the right order? Do we have the right POV for this story? Are there too many points of view? Are there not enough? The big picture stuff that can send you into heavy rewrites or heavy reorganization. That is oftentimes one of the most expensive kinds of editing. But when you are really early in your career, a developmental editor can give you as much information about your writing as a college course can. So it is like a one-on-one, real deep dive on your book. It's not cheap, but it can be really worth it for early practicing writers. I also want to note that developmental editing will happen before line or copy editing happens, because you're going to be rearranging and rewriting things. So I recommend hiring one early on in the process if you're going to hire one, simply because if you've paid money to have line or copy editing done and you're going back and rewriting whole chapters, it's just going to end up being a waste of money and time in the end. So I would start with developmental editing if you're going to go there. I have more than once had to tell a client while I was doing a different kind of edit that a developmental edit was needed and shifted gears. When I encounter a situation like this, generally speaking, my response is to pause what I'm doing, send an email to my client and be like, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I think we might want to approach. Do you want to shift gears and take a look at this? And I do this because I really feel strongly that my job as an editor is to try and provide the best service I can for my clients. It's not an upsell attempt. I'm not trying to get more money out of them, but I really want to make sure that the book is the best it can possibly be. And I don't feel that it's ethical to give line editing when developmental editing is really necessary. Now, if a client tells me that they only want line editing and they don't want to do a developmental edit because of whatever the reasoning is, I respect that and will do the line edit as they ask. But I always will pause and ask them first, simply because I think it's really important to be the best possible person for my clients. So those are the three kinds of people that you're likely going to see or work with while you're working on your first draft or very early drafts of your book. So after the first draft, you're going to enter the next phase of this process, and with that phase come new people that you are going to be potentially working with. The first of these people in this phase I want to mention are the beta readers. Again, you've probably heard this term in writing groups, and it is a phenomenal resource for authors. They oftentimes will see the book after a round or two of self-editing, so these folks see a more polished version than the initial one. And I just went through this process with my book, How to Publish the Damn Book. Just like with alpha readers too, there are paid beta readers. Sometimes editors will offer this service. I offer it under what I call manuscript assessment. It's essentially a beta read, but I call it an assessment because it's a little deeper than your average beta read. That said, unpaid beta readers might be close author friends, sometimes family members if they are folks who are interested in your story. These are the people who are going to review your book when you're getting ready to enter the final stages or when you're about ready to hire an editor and want to make sure you're on the right track. If you're using somebody who isn't paid, you're going to have mixed feedback. Sometimes people also will not give you any feedback at all or even read the book, so don't take that personally. That happens a lot. The job of a beta reader is not to edit the book. They are not developmental editors. They are line editors. Their job is to see what they liked, what they didn't like. Did the book accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish? Oftentimes with a beta read, you will have questions that you ask them. When I did a recent beta read, I sent out a list of 5 to 8 questions. Did I accomplish this? Did I mean to do that? Did I repeat myself? Things like that. All of those questions are things I wanted to explicitly look for. Obviously, there was a space at the bottom for them to add more feedback, and some of the people reading my book were editors, so they left me comments in the margins, for which I am incredibly grateful. Kind of in the same vein, you have sensitivity readers. Again, these are people who are looking at the manuscript after you've done as much self-editing as you can, and they're looking at things like whether or not there is racist language, ableist language, do you properly represent marginalized groups in a way, are there mental health issues that you discuss in your book that you could probably handle differently, that kind of thing. These folks are not always necessary, but I strongly advise them whenever you are using a culture that isn't yours, or if you are approaching a subject with which you are not personally familiar. So if, for example, you are not physically disabled and you're writing a deep perspective from a physically disabled character, I would advise you contact a sensitivity reader. Different sensitivity readers have different strengths and skills, and if you can, contact somebody who is of the group that you are representing. That is always best, but if you can't, there are plenty of people who are able to help with inclusive language and avoiding racism and other things in your work if you cannot find somebody who is of the group in question. But always try and find somebody who's of that group if you possibly can, because their experience is going to be the most useful to you. Also, at this point, I'm going to note that after beta reading and sensitivity reading, you might end up going back into rewrites and need to repeat this process a couple of times. That may well be a reality for you, particularly early on in your author career. There is nothing wrong with that. It is just part of the process, so you might end up going through this a couple of times before you finally hit the next person on this list. And of course, that next person is the line and copy editor. These may be separated, it might be the same person. But when people think of editing, this is usually what they are thinking about. So editors are correcting commas, fixing your syntax, reviewing your spelling, helping you catch things like passive voice. This kind of stuff is what most people think of when they think of editing, and I am not going to get too deep into it. The only thing I will say is that when you hit this point, make sure that you have done as much of your developmental correction as possible, because you don't want to hire these people prematurely. If you do, you're going to end up spending a lot of money on content that might end up completely rewritten, and it won't be a worthwhile use of your money or their time. Also, the more polished your manuscript is, the less money you are going to have to spend on line and copy editing, because it will take them less time. So keep that in your mind while you are approaching this process. The more work you do, the better a manuscript is when you send it off to your line and copy editor, the less amount of money you will end up having to pay them, because it will take them less time to work on the manuscript. Finally, in the home stretch, these are the folks that you can hire and work with as you're preparing to publish your book. So this will be after all the edits are done to the best of your ability and you are looking at hitting go on that publication. The first person on this list I'm going to mention is your book formatter or interior designer. Interior designers differ from book formatters in the sense that they also oftentimes will create graphics. They frequently will do things like scene separators, or if you're working in nonfiction, they might do charts or other images, and they will place those in the book for you. Book formatters also may instead just do ebook conversions. That is a thing. It depends on what your needs are, so you'll want to check and see what your individual is going to be able to provide you. But ultimately, their job is to make your book look like a book and be ready to upload to your distributor, either for print or for ebook or for both, depending on your method of distribution. Along with your formatter and interior designer, you will have a cover designer. This probably doesn't need a lot of explanation. These are the folks who make book covers, and they make them look fabulous. I happen to love mine. Shout out to Angel. She is just the actual best. For nonfiction authors, there are also indexers. These people, I swear they work black magic somehow. I don't know how they do their job, but if you look at the back of a book and find an index back there, that is because an indexer did it, and they are just amazing, honestly. I don't know how they do what they do. I think my brain would melt and run out of my ears if I had to try, so good on them, but I did want to mention that that is a job that you might be able to hire out. Next on this list will come after your interior design is done, because you are going to have proofreaders. I'm sorry about the yelling in the background. The cat is convinced there's something on my ceiling and is screaming at it. I think it's probably ghosts. At any rate, proofreaders are individuals who look at the formatting and identify any errors, so they will make sure that the heading fonts are correct, they will make sure that the kerning and leading are correct, they will do a last pass for any typos or other structural issues. They just are kind of the last final set of eyes to look at a manuscript before it is ready to go. These folks are phenomenal, and they oftentimes will be working with a PDF version of a print manuscript, or sometimes they will be working with a proof copy of the book, hence proofreader. If it's an ebook, they may well be working in Word, but with the physical copies, that is usually where they shine the best. Or, well, these days with PDF. Next, we have publishing coaches, which is another thing that I do. It's very similar to book coaching, but it can help you navigate things like where to distribute your book, your branding, your marketing, what your marketing plans are, and all of the business elements that go into the process. It's the stuff that you want to talk about when you're getting ready to hit publish, but would be really overwhelming to think about while you're working on writing the story itself. So book coaches can also offer publishing coaching. Sometimes they marry the two together. I separate them because they happen at different phases of the process myself. But book coaches oftentimes will offer both of these things. Also, there are publishing coaches who don't do book coaching and might just talk to you about various different elements of the final process instead. So again, double check with these folks and see what it is their expertise is in before you book a session with somebody. Along with the publishing coaching, you have book marketers or publicists. A lot of the times they may be also folks who do publishing coaching, or they may just specialize in marketing. These are the folks who will help you find the best way to position and sell your book. A good book marketer is never going to approach you. So if you're getting DMs on Instagram offering to show your book to millions and millions of bots, it's not going to help anything. Do not hire those individuals. It's not going to boost your sales. It will just drain your marketing budget. Instead, a good marketer might talk to you about your blurb, whether or not your cover art fits the genre. They might talk about the keywords or help you figure out what genre your book is. They might help you identify your target audience and how to reach them, create a social media strategy with you. They are worth their weight in gold. And there are a few people whose names always kind of come to front of mind for me when I talk about this. And those individuals are Mal and Jill Cooper, Jen DePaula, Quinn Ward, Brian Cohen, and Tammy Lebrecq. They are just phenomenal, wonderful human beings. They have phenomenal advice. They're all experts in their fields, and all of those people kind of do slightly different things. For example, Mal and Jill Cooper are Facebook experts. Jen DePaula is overall social media strategy. Quinn is a book blurb master and does a lot in Amazon. Brian Cohen knows a lot about, also he does book blurbs, and he does keywords and all kinds of stuff. He's real deep in Amazon. And Tammy Lebrecq is just the best at newsletters. Each of these folks has something different to offer, and they are just wonderful. So I strongly recommend them if you are looking for people in that sphere. The last person I'm going to mention on this list is the personal assistant. These folks are the ones who might help you create graphics for social media posts, manage scheduling social media posting, help handle email correspondence if there are events. When you're early on in your career, these folks may or may not be a cost-effective thing for you, but if you struggle with ADHD or have trouble getting social media stuff done, they can be worth their weight in gold. So consider what they do and assess whether or not it's going to be an effective use of your money. If you don't have the finances to hire one, don't feel pressure to. That said, once you hit a certain point in your career, they become almost a requirement, because at that point, all of your marketing and everything can take over your full-time position and then leave you with very little energy and space to write. So personal assistants can be really vital with that kind of thing. They aren't publicists, so they won't create your social media strategy, but there are plenty of them who know enough to help you keep a social media strategy that you already have going. So they are just wonderful people, and if you can afford them, and if they fit for you, I strongly suggest talking to them. They can be very reasonably priced too, because depending on your needs, they only might need to work 3 to 5 hours a week for you. So make sure you contact somebody and see what you need, what they offer, and find ways to make that gap covered. So there you have it. This list is obviously not all-encompassing. I might forget a few different people who are part of the industry. If I've forgotten somebody, please let me know down in the comments. Others might benefit from your awareness, and I am more than happy to be called out if I made a mistake. If you are in need of any of these services beyond personal assistance and marketing, I don't do those things, but I do the rest of those, or I am closely tied with people who do. My company, Insomnia Self-Publishing Services, will get you to that place. You can find my company over at selfpub, that's selfpub.me. So if you are looking for deeper information or want help navigating these services or are interested in any of them, please give me a call. And I hope you have a great week. I will be around next week.